عليهم بقى بحكي بيسكتوا. هذا المقطع بقى اللي حكيته هلا كان ولا؟
بدك أحذفه بس خلاص طالع معه.
طيب. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So today inshallah we're going to start hadith number 39. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله تجاوز لي عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان وما استكره عليه. حديث حسن رواه ابن ماجه والبيهقي. On the authority of Ibn Abbas عنه, that the Prophet Muhammad said, "Verily Allah has pardoned for me my ummah their mistakes, their forgetfulness, and that which they have been forced to do under duress." This is a hadith Hasan, or Hasan hadith, reported by Ibn Majah and Bayhaqi and others. So just a little thing about this hadith. So there was discussion about the authenticity of certain parts of the hadith and the different narrations of it. And this, so they say the part of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ says "Li," that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pardoned the ummah because of him. So that some of the scholars say that this is the weakest part probably of the hadith, and they get into the discussion: is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pardon our ummah, and this is something that's exclusive to us, which we'll discuss later. But one thing that we, in Islam, we honor the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We send a salawat upon him, and he'll inshallah intercede on our behalf by saying sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by following his example. But we also know the boundaries that the Christians and Jews did not abide by, and they took a step further and associated their Prophet, or Isa alayhi salam, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whereas we also honor Isa alayhi salam as a prophet, all right, but no more no less. So here we don't do the same as they do with their prophets. We know that Prophet ﷺ is our prophet, our example, our role model, and was sent as the best of humanity to walk on the face of the earth. And whoever follows his example, right, will inshallah be directed, hopefully, in following his example and his sunnah, all right, will help us one step closer to the paradise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to do so. Also this hadith establishes a couple of things. Now we're going to talk about how the 3 points of forgetfulness, mistakes, and doing something under force or duress, how does Islam deal with those 3 situations? Now, this hadith establishes that Islam, or the principle that religion, came to remove harm and establish the special virtues are given to our ummah. All right, where the previous nations were not given this. So here, when the hadith says, the Prophet ﷺ says that for my ummah, so this is exclusive for us, meaning that nations before were not given this luxury. They were not forgiven for their mistakes or for forgetfulness, and this was given to us. And they say that there's 2 ways they know this. They say sometimes the scholars go back through the hadith in a backward way. So they say that for us being forgiven, meaning that the previous nations were not forgiven. Also in Ayah al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Baqarah, in Ayah number 286, وَلَا تَحْمِلْ عَلَيْنَا إِسْرًا كَمَا حَمَلْتَهُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِنَا. They say this part of the ayah, when it says, "Oh Allah, do not hold us to account for mistakes and forgiveness as you held the nations before us." All right, so this is also a proof here in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made this especially for our ummah. Also, Ibn al-Haythami, he says about this hadith, it encompasses half of our deen, maybe all of it, because the actions that we do intentionally or not, and the literal meaning says we're not accountable in these situations, unintentional, and the implied meaning suggests we are held accountable for the intentional actions. All right. So the thing is, we see this hadith also is very important when studying fiqh, and especially when it comes to fiqh aspects and different situations and circumstances. And we see that it's not black and white. There's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of different scenarios, and there's things that are 100% conclusive, but a lot of times, all right, the scenarios may differ from individual to individual. Now the thing is, they ask, or some describe or explain, why would Imam an-Nawawi put this hadith? And they say because, probably humbly say, request that Allah's forgiveness and his request Allah's forgiveness for his shortcomings in compiling this collection. So though Allah forgives us, it is not a must on Him to do so, all right, or choose to do so. So it makes us fear Him more and also understand Allah's mercy more. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can treat us as He treated the nations before us. And we see here that the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala overcomes His justice. And here we see, subhanAllah, when we understand the mercy of Allah, if Allah was to be just, we'll all be punished for everything that we do, and probably no one will be left on the face of the earth. But by Allah's mercy, Allah gives us opportunity after opportunity, all right, to gain His mercy and rahmah. So we see her mercy takes precedence over justice. Now the thing is, when we think about ourselves, with our parents when we're younger, we can make many mistakes, all right? Whether it's watching things or saying things or doing many different things. And despite that, they tend to overlook our shortcomings. All right? They tend to look over our shortcomings. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful than our parents. And you would see, like when Sufyan al-Thawri, right, one of the scholars is asked, would they rather be judged by Allah or your parents? He said, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he understood the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here we see this hadith also, many rules of fiqh were derived from this hadith. I mean, if one day we just spoke about this hadith and you would see that, here alone, like they have 70, 80 pages just describing this short hadith and many of the axioms that come from it. Now the first concept that I want to talk about in this hadith is something called Umum al-Muqtada. All right, and this is a fiqh ruling or axiom. And is that how general and encompassing can one makes one required assumption when the text itself does not provide all of the essential components. Basically, can one assume all four possibilities, or can one assume only one of them? So this may seem confusing, but simply here, the question arises when Allah pardons our sins, there's three possibilities. Does Allah only pardon the sin itself? All right? Or is it not doing the deed? Are we pardoned from that? Or is it both? So Imam Abu Hanifa is very strict when it comes to this, all right? And he rejects this concept of Umum al-Muqtada, where he says that, it only applies to the sin, but not anything else, not the responsibility and so forth, where the other Imams, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, and Imam Shafi'i, say it applies to both. So in fact, this is called the absolute minimum or the absolute maximum. What is pardoned? And generally we see it is the absolute minimum, all right? So simple example, all right, you're fasting in the month of Ramadan, you forget you're fasting, all right, and then you eat. Now, in all three madhahib, you don't have to make up your fast, all right? You don't have to make up your fast. Except for the madhab Imam Malik, you need to make it up, all right? But if it's a sunnah fast, of course, he says no. But for the obligatory fast, he says you have to make it up if it's done out of forgetfulness. But the general consensus amongst the scholars, you don't have to make it up. But if it's a mistake, for example, you're on a mountain or you're outside traveling, you don't have a calendar, and you saw the sun setting and you thought it was time for iftar, you tried your best to see it, but then later on you go to your car and realize an hour later that you broke your fast before the time of Maghrib. So this is the difference between here forgetting and a mistake. In the first case, he made a mistake. All right, you ate by accident, you forgot in the moment. The second scenario, somebody actually, the first case he forgot, all right, it was out of forgetfulness. The second case, he made a mistake by breaking his fast before the time. So in this case, he's not held responsible as a sin, but he has to make up his fast, all right? Or, and in that case, in Imam Abu Hanifa's madhab, not only make up the fast, but also, all right, pay a kafara or maximum kafara for that, all right? Same thing with eating on purpose, all right? If somebody eats on purpose, all right, this is where Imam Abu Hanifa says somebody not only has to make up the fast, has to pay kafara for breaking his fast. And here we see a very important component. What is the difference between all three? Is the intention. If somebody intentionally breaks their fast, it is a sin, and they have to make it up and make tawbah. In most opinions, Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, make it up plus, all right, do a kafara, whether it's fasting a couple of months or feeding a certain amount of people, and so forth. So here the key point is also taqwa, all right, taqwa and conscience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether you actually did forget, whether it was actually a mistake, or were you actually intentional in what you said. And as one of the axioms in fiqh, also al-amur bi maqasidiha, intentions are judged, our actions are judged by the intentions. All right. So sometimes you may say something, but based on your intent, all right, that is the ruling, or based on what you say. So for example, all right, let's say somebody, does not say technically he divorced his wife, but he says with the intent of divorce that go back to your family. So because of his intent of divorce, this can be counted as a divorce, right? So in certain cases, this applies. So the thing is, I'm going to give more scenarios, an example for this, inshallah, and we'll see how far we go, and we'll go from there. Now, Imam Muslim, when he talks about the last two ayahs of Surah Al-Baqarah, all right, he talks about the exclusive dua, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. Oh Allah, all right, do not hold us to account if you forget or make a mistake. And this dua is exclusive for our ummah. Now the thing is, a mistake is a deed or a word that springs out of a man without, or a woman without intention. All right. So somebody says something by accident, does something by accident. The intent, you had an intent to do something. For example, you had the intent to go to the masjid, but you ended up in the school. All right. It was an accident. It was not done on purpose. So here we see this is considered to be a mistake. Now the thing is, overlooking for forgetfulness, mistakes, and actions under duress depends on the rights of the affected person. And rights in Islam are related to three. So here we talk about the different rights. We have the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the rights of the community, and the rights of the individual. And one of the scholars by the name of Sa'di, he says, if someone makes a mistake in what they are commanded to do, then it is not overlooked in the dunya sense. They must redo it again properly. But if they make a mistake, all right, in what they are prohibited from doing, then it can be overlooked. Now, of course, mistakes in Aqidah or Fiqh can also be overlooked depending on the circumstance. But I'm going to give the four different scenarios as to how this applies. The first case scenario is you unintentionally fail to perform an obligatory act. All right, so you are not held accountable for the sin, but you're not resolved of that responsibility. All right, you're not resolved of that responsibility. So here first it has to do with the act of leaving a command by mistake or forgetting. So for example, you're giving zakat al-mal, and you gave the mal of zakat. You found out later that the person you gave zakat to was rich. All right, you made a mistake. Now you either have one or two things. Either you go back to that person and you take the zakat money back, you're allowed to ask him and give it to somebody who deserves the zakat. Otherwise you have to pay the zakat again. All right. So here, even though you're not held responsible in terms of the akhirah for the sin, but you have to make sure now you give the zakat to somebody who actually deserves it. So that's why, subhanallah, and this is if you find out even a year later, all right, that this happened, then you have to rectify that. All right. So this is an example. If you do something unintentionally or performing an act, and you did a mistake in doing so and it wasn't unintentional, so you're absolved of, you're not responsible for the act, you're not necessarily getting a sin, but now you have a different responsibility to rectify that act. The second scenario, all right, is that you do something haram unintentionally, but it's not causing harm to anyone else. All right, you do something haram unintentionally, but it's not causing harm to anyone else. So for example, you went to a restaurant and you told them that you want no alcohol in the drink. All right. And one time there was actually a story someone Sheikh was saying, this is actually overseas, and the person giving the talk, he started to act a little different. All right, he's making jokes and you can see the effects of the alcohol. They found out later that it actually had alcohol in it. All right. So the thing is, this person is not held responsible, all right, for that particular act, all right. But he has to stop doing it. He can't say, man, this tastes really good, alhamdulillah, let me get some more. He has to stop the act. Same thing with pork, all right. You asked, you did your due diligence, you tried, you made sure that it has no pork. You find out later it had pork. I know one brother, when he found out, he put his finger in his and he made sure he threw up, all right. You go to a restaurant, you ask them, is this zabiha? And they say yes, all right. Now for some reason, 1 year later, you find out it wasn't zabiha. All right, like to your terms and whatever, you're not held responsible for that. All right. Another example you're going to Hajj or Umrah, and you forget that you're in the state of ihram, and you're like so hungry, and you go hunt an animal. In our case, you don't hunt animals right now when you're going to Hajj or Umrah. If you do, that's different. That's weird. But let's say you spray cologne on yourself. Okay, so these are things that if they're done unintentionally, this is something haram you're not supposed to do. All right, and whether it was a mistake or unintentional, you forgot, then all right, you're not held responsible for that. But you should, abstain from continuing or ask Allah Subhanahu wa Taala, all right, to forgive you in that case. But these are the examples they use in regards to this. Oh, it makes sense so far. We're good, everyone, inshallah. And then if you have any questions, let me know at the end, inshallah. Now, number 3, all right, if the one who makes the mistake is due to forgetfulness, all right, and it involves harming somebody else, all right, if it involves harming somebody else, you may be absolved of the action of the, forgiven for the akhir, you're not sin, but you have to fulfill the rights of those who you wronged. So, for example, you're driving your car and you went to somebody's garage. All right, you did it by accident. Now, in this country, you have insurance and not insurance, but in Islam, all right, you have to fulfill the right. You have to make sure, all right, you're liable for that. And that's why one of the scholars said, all right, if a person were not held responsible for his actions against others done out of forgetfulness or mistake, it would cause a great deal of hardship and destroy the interests of the people. All right. Indeed, this might lead to anarchy, and people could destroy others' properties and claim it was a mistake or some aspect of forgetfulness. Making people responsible for such actions should make them more prudent in their actions. So, we say, I did this by accident. I broke like the windows here at the masjid, right? Somebody threw the ping pong paddle, and mashallah, instead of hitting the ball, hit the window, all right? Oh, you can't see it now because they put a cover over it. It was an accident. But here it says that they're responsible for that. All right? They're responsible for that. Because everyone will say that everything's a mistake or accident. You can't judge anyone's intention. Only Allah is aware of their true intent. So here, whether their intention was intentional or not, all right, then in that case, they are responsible for it. So here we have to always think about that. SubhanAllah, hit somebody's car by accident. All right? That's because, you can think you can get away with it. No, as Muslim, you're responsible. You put a note, here's the number. All right, fulfill this request. All right, you do something unintentional and it harms somebody else. All right, you must fulfill their rights in regards to this. And it's not something to be taken lightly. A lot of people do hit and runs. A lot of people break things. A lot of people do things. And that's why in our homes, even if something breaks, we should hold our kids responsible for it. It doesn't matter. It's not the idea of getting something new. It does not cost much money. It's the principle of responsibility. Being aware and responsible for your actions. Even if it's something like a ping pong ball or something like that's worth not even $1, it's not the idea. The idea is being responsible for action. That's why even when we look at water bottles, right? When we look at how much water is wasted, how much food is wasted, whether now Ramadan or around the world, it is that we see how much by being wasteful and not responsible, how much it makes hardship to those who don't have water around the world, and those who don't have resources, how much of it makes it hard. So here we see in this fiqh aspect, in this third scenario, that if you did something unintentional, all right, then you must fix it with the individual you harmed or the property you harmed or whatever it may be, all right. So even if you're like somebody messes up their father or mother's belongings, they go into the room or something, they should also be responsible for that, just to train them on this type of mindset, all right. Because here, as the scholar says, Ibn Humayd, is that it makes us more prudent in their actions and more aware of what we do and conscious, all right, of our actions and who we're affecting, who we're harming. SubhanAllah, if you look at this at an even deeper level, the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it says, "Man ghasha falaysa minna," whoever cheats is not one of us, or the hadith, is talking about that. And I remember when my students would ask about cheating on the test, what's the big deal? So if you read the scholars, what they say about this, they say you're causing harm to others. So even if you're unintentionally thinking that this is no big deal, but you're actually harming others, and then they say that if you are, get your grades and the scholarship at the expense and cheating at the expense of others, they say even your risk and your sustenance can be haram, all right, because you attained it in a haram manner, unless you make tawbah, of course. But here to see how serious it is, that we should never this thing, what's the big deal? And that's why they say one of the signs of a hypocrite is that when they look at a deed, they say it's no big deal. For the believer, all right, it's like a weight on their shoulders, like a mountain on their shoulders when they commit any type of small sin. So we have to be more aware that, you know what, all right, did I do this on, what am I doing? Can it harm anyone in any way possible? So we have to be careful about that. Same thing when you buy or watch things that are copyright, or do things that are copyright, and people, their livelihood depends on these things. We have to be more conscious of that. And the final and fourth scenario, if a person performs an act unintentionally or out of forgetfulness that would not require a prescribed punishment, that aspect of non-intentional forgetfulness would be sufficient to remove the punishment for him or her. However, he may have to fulfill other requirements that are different from the prescribed punishment. I'll give an example. When it comes to killing, if somebody kills somebody else intentionally, and there's an Islamic state, the had is that person be punished as the same way, right? That person is held responsible. But then, what if there's shubha khata? What if there's you actually wanted to get revenge on this person, and you had a stick. Now the stick, you're not intending to kill this person. You just want to hit him, but then you hit him in a spot that you never knew, all right, was going to harm him, and then you hit him with the stick and he dies. All right. So now the had is not going to be placed upon it. There's an Islamic ruling system, but there is a different type of punishment. All right. There is a different type of punishment. There's no qisas, of course, but this person is held responsible. Another example. Let's say you're playing cricket or baseball, and nobody's wearing helmets, and somebody has a baseball, and it hits somebody's head so hard, and it causes their head to explode, and they actually die. So there wasn't any intention to harm the individual, but you actually unintentionally killed that person. So you're not going to be held responsible for the killing itself as a major sin, but there is a certain type of punishment that you'll be held accountable for in that case. Same thing with a car accident. You hit somebody, all right, it was unintentional, but that person died or some injury is caused. There is some level of responsibility, all right, that must be carried in that particular case. And that's why something we have to understand also, when people convert to Islam, their sins are forgiven with a condition of tawbah. But also, if they're held, there's acts and rights that they have to fulfill towards others, it must be fulfilled. All right, if they did crimes that harmed other people, this is very important. Also, that must not be overlooked. So yes, they are forgiven, but they must be held for the things they've done. All right, when it comes to particular actions. Another example, when it comes to this, all right, there's a hadith that says there's three things, whether you're joking or serious about it, when you say it, it doesn't matter your intention, it counts. There's three particular things. Anyone know those three things? All right, marriage, divorce, and zawaj al-talaq wal-atq, right? Marriage, divorce, and freeing a slave. These three things, even if you're joking or not joking, if you say them, they count. So for example, there was a particular play, all right, they were doing in a particular school, and the guy and the girl, all right, he proposed and she said yes. So now, of course, there's witnesses, all right, but of course, there's no wali, or the wali didn't accept, but this particular sheikh, and the Hanafi madhab, he says, you don't necessarily have to have a wali. So he was like, man, this actually, even though it's a play, all right, and even though it's not real, but actually may count as a marriage. All right, he was getting kind of nervous, right? Because so here we see even in an act, and they do this act, and actually they say, hey, there's a dowry and this and that, it may count. But then it turned out the person who was proposing to the other person, he was dressed up like a girl. So it's like it's a guy and a guy, it can't be a marriage. Alhamdulillah. All right. It's a batil contract. It reminds me when I was in 7th grade, my teacher was telling us that make sure when, he was telling us brothers that when you get married, make sure you marry a woman. You don't want to get married and find out like, whoa, this guy's a man. All right, you don't want to get surprised. Right, nowadays you don't know. It can be many different things. May Allah protect us, inshallah, in those moments. All right. So, anyways, so that's another thing. When it comes to that, also, and they also use the example of somebody. What if somebody commits adultery by accident? All right, and this may seem crazy. All right. But many times, especially in the olden times or in history, where somebody didn't see much woman in their life, or they were told to go into a room, he didn't know it was her, or whatever it may be, and vice versa. All right. Also, that that there's exceptions to that. Now, let's say for example, though, you're in the middle of nowhere, and it's time for salah, and you're looking for the qibla. All right. So they say it's a couple of things. Number one, if you did your best to find the Qibla, you asked everyone, you went to a hotel, you asked them where's the Qibla, where's northeast, where's 55 degrees, and you tried your best, and then you find out like an hour later, somebody comes to you and says, by the way, you were prayed the wrong way, but because you were trying to follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you put your utmost effort, all right, you are not held responsible for it. You don't have to make up the prayer. But if you just went there like, who cares, Ardullah wasi', I'll pray whatever I want to pray whatever direction, all right, they say in Surah Al-Baqarah, they repeat the ayah, righteousness not turn your head, your face towards the east or the west, but to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, halas, no, that person has to repeat his salah. All right, that person has to repeat the salah. So you have to, so here in Islam, the effort, all right, is very important. Same thing with the pork. If you just went to a place knowing that there's a possibility there's pork in it, and you didn't even try, you didn't ask, no, you're responsible for that. All right. Now, also when it comes to, so we see here trying your best to fulfill the act and not committing haram is a very important condition, all right, to not be held responsible. Now, sometimes being forgetful is not an excuse. Being forgetful sometimes cannot be an excuse. When is that? All right. For example, you're walking and you step on the feces of a dog. All right. And then you say to yourself, I'm going to clean this at, 1 hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later. All right, but then you forget. You're held responsible for forgetting at that moment. All right, you're supposed to take care of it at that spot. But let's say the opposite happens. All right, you cleaned it, you tried your best to clean it off, any najasa, and then you were praying, and during salah you smell something. Like, man, something doesn't smell right. And during salah you remove it. Say it was your shoe or a sock or something, and you remove it. That's different. Why? Because you tried to initially try your best to remove it right when it happened. Okay? Same thing when it comes to salah, for example. All right? You forgot it was time for salah, right when you remember, you make it up, you pray right away. But if you intentionally stay up, and it happens multiple times when you stay up at night, you're waking up late for Fajr. All right? Imam Ahmed, what does he say? All right, here, because when they talk about salah, does it take you out of Islam? There's a big debate amongst the scholars. But one of the things they say, you have to have the maximum effort. Meaning, some people say, even if you have like 7 alarms, all right, you try your best, you're trying everything to make sure you're not going to miss Fajr. You have to think about it. If you had a big exam like an MCAT, all right, you had a big test, you had a big interview, you're going to put in your mind everything, every way possible that, hey, you know what? All right, I'm not going to miss this interview, I'm not going to miss this test, because you know how much it means. So for our salah, if you did all of that, and you still didn't wake up, then that's different. But if you put absolutely no effort, you slept at 4 a.m., all right, and you've been doing this for many, many nights, not like once or twice, but many times, and it happens, forgetfulness or laziness in this case, all right, is not an excuse, all right, is not an excuse. So here we see that when it comes to the Qibla, if you put no effort, you have to repeat. So you see here, subhanAllah, how important it is our intention, but also here we see that there's many nuances. It's not always black and white when it comes to even salah and fasting in many different circumstances. But the thing is that we have to make sure, all right, we're aware of that. So for example, another example I'll give, you're traveling, and then it's time for salah, and then you do tayammum. You think you don't have water, but you find out later you have water. You have to do it again, right? Because you yourself, were under the impression, or you thought, so this was, a mistake, but this mistake has to be rectified by making the salah and doing the salah again and making wudu and praying again. So it depends on the circumstance when it comes to forgetfulness or mistakes and how we handle or act in those particular situations. But we see how important it is, all right, to try our best to fulfill what the Prophet ﷺ wants us to do. Now, in the case of a mujtahid, all right, in the case of a mujtahid, these things do not apply to a mujtahid. Somebody who's a faqih, and for example, he gives a ruling based on the ayah or hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and let's say, for example, his ruling is not correct, all right, he still gets one reward. And if somebody makes the correct ruling, he gets double the reward. And when you study fiqh, all right, you see you have dhanni, all right, probable evidence, and you have qat'i, conclusive evidence. When it comes to conclusive evidence, there's not much disagreement. Nobody can disagree that salah is 5 times a day. No one can disagree that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. No one can disagree that alcohol is haram. All right? But the things that are done improper, there's a lot of debate amongst the fuqaha and scholars when it comes to a lot of different issues when it pertains to these things. So the idea is we have to be very careful. Not anyone and everyone can become a mujtahid or just be, give any ruling. All right, so you know what, the qibla, I think let's make the qibla this way, or I'm going to give my own ijtihad and ruling and fatwa. No, you have to base it upon our evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we see here the scholars are different in certain aspects, but generally speaking, you see there's a lot of similarities when it comes to these particular matters, and it shows the practicality of our deen of Islam, that you're forgiven, all right, and Allah puts into account when we forget, when we make a mistake. Oh yeah, and also one thing I did want to mention about this, all right, is ignorance. All right, ignorance. So if you're ignorant about certain things or you didn't know and you're trying your best to fulfill it, all right, also, all right, you're not held as much as account depending, all right, for example, you're praying Salat al-Dhuhr and you go from Sami' Allahu liman, actually you say, before ruku' you go to sujood. You miss the whole rukun, the pillar of making a ruku', all right, then your salat is invalid. So in this case, you're not responsible for the ignorant and not knowing, but you are responsible for now knowing when you do know to make up that salah. Okay? So even if you forgot Surah Al-Fatiha, all right, you're not necessarily going to get a sin, but you have to repeat the salah. All right, you have to repeat the salah if you forgot, because there's certain pillars in your salah that if they're not done, your salah is invalid. Same thing, you forgot that when you're making sujood and prostration, that let's say as a brother your awrah shows when you're making sajda from the back, and you did an intentional thing that is a sin, that's haram, and wasn't intentional, but then you still have to, repeat the salah because that is a thing that invalidates the salah. In a capitalistic society, they say ignorance is not an excuse, right? The police pulls you over. They don't care if you forgot. They don't care if you're intentional or not intentional. They're going to give you a ticket. All right, that's their job. All right. At the end of the day, you're at the mercy of whoever pulls you over, or so forth. Of course, now, if there's an Islamic state, all right, the Islamic State, for example, let's say you kill somebody intentionally or unintentionally, or there's a certain ruling, the judge sometimes can add a punishment, his own punishment, all right, particularly on a particular case. But because of certain things like this or certain forgetfulness, even those punishments are removed. And we don't have an Islamic State today, so but we're just talking about generally speaking. All right, we'll go to judge. So here in a society, when we're held, nobody's going to hold you account most of the time. All right, nobody knows if your salah, you forgot your fajr or not. Nobody knows if you unintentionally missed salah or not. But you are responsible for your family, and you're responsible for yourself at least. All right, and to remind those who are close to you, all right, that hey, whether they forget or make a mistake, that you must either make this up or this you're okay with to do, and you have to be consistent. So if you follow the Imam Malik madhab when it comes to breaking your fast by mistake, then he's not only make it up, but also you have to do 1, 2, 3. Then you have to know the ruling, or in the Hanafi madhab, for example. So you must understand the differences when it comes to that, and the nuances when it comes to that, and when forgetfulness is not okay. Now next week I wanted to cover the last part of the hadith, is that when you're put in a position to do something, when are you okay to lie under pressure and so forth, or do something under pressure. I'll give an example, and we go, inshallah, we'll continue it next week, inshallah. Sumayya and Ammar, all right, I'm sorry, and Yasir, they're martyrs, some of the first martyrs in Islam, correct? Now who was their son? Ammar, correct? Now when he saw what happened to his parents, may Allah be pleased with them, all right, he was put under a lot of pressure. Abu Jahl went to him and said, and he told him to call Muhammad a different name. Okay? Now, in his heart, he still believed in Allah, but he said, and that's why Allah described in Surah Al-Nahl, if it was not for the fact that he was put under duress and pressure, all right, it would have been a different story. All right? So then we're going to discuss, what do you do in those situations where we feel pressure? Every one of us feels pressure. At your job, you're about to make wudu, everyone's looking at you when you're about to put your feet in the sink, and then they put a sign, no showers in the sink. All right? And they say, Muslims, I remember when I was at USF, I don't know if they do this, but they had signs up, no showers in the sink, right? I was just paying wudu. But they do all these crazy stuff, and they call it no. Another example. Let's say, for example, somebody puts a gun to your head, or comes and says to you, give me $500. And when I give you $500, I want you to do and say this particular thing. Now, for somebody who makes $1 million, all right, $500 like pick a pocket change, like here, go. For that person is different than the person that $500 is their whole life. So then it depends also on the individual and in the situation and the circumstance, what is considered to be pressure and duress and what is not considered. Same thing with Jum'ah, something with going like to a corporate party. Are you under really 100% pressure to attend this party or not? Are you under 100% pressure, all right, to do 1, 2, 3? So then somebody would say, how about wearing the hijab? I might not get this job. I might not get this interview. All right. So here, this last part of the hadith, that's what I wanted to save it for next week. We kind of explain what is actually considered being coerced or forced into a situation and what is not. And how to handle then, the third aspect, how to handle pressure in general. Right? A lot of times you don't know how to handle pressure. All right? Especially our kids are put in situations every day, even within Muslims. They're bullied, they're attacked, they're called names, they're put under pressure to buy certain things, to buy a house on interest, you put under pressure. You're told to take a loan under pressure, right? With interest, whatever it may be. So how do we deal with these situations without disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is something very key and important that we learn how to understand the difference between pressure, which is actually life. Life is full of pressure, right? You have to meet deadlines. You have to do 1, 2, 3, all right? What is somebody forcing you to do something, all right? And that is, when is it excusable, all right? And also, and when you are in a situation where you're forced to do something, but your action can affect many others, all right? So even in those cases, you may not be able to do certain things. So then in all these cases, we'll go over them, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. In regards to now, inshallah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He forgives us for anything that we forget, any mistakes we may do, and overlooks our shortcomings, forgives our sins, and that we do not cause harm to others, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enables us to be aware and conscious of our actions, all right, and that we are held to account in this dunya and not the akhirah. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallahu fikum wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Any questions or comments? You, brother.